Hello, everyone, and welcome to Magma Rages episode 37. Today, we're going to be talking about some budget decks, some very new player friendly decks with no epics and no legendaries for each class. We're also going to be talking about a little bit more news we've got from BlizzCon and the surrounding events and discussions about the Kobolds and Catacombs expansion. And then, of course, we'll have our usual esports segments where we can talk about some ESL action as well as Trinity series that's been going on. So, let's start off with the decks that we have. So, we have found a really useful resource on Hearthstone Top Decks, which is able to provide us with some deck lists here for each class. And we've also got some suggestions for ways to improve these decks. So, starting off, we're going to be talking about Druid first. Um, oh yeah, I forgot to introduce. I'm Div as usual. Man, I like completely blanked on that part. And this is Pandemonia with me.
Alright,
And Pandemonia, what is the Druid deck that we're going to be talking about?
so this is the bane of many people's existence, and this is Jade Druid. So the show is actually very close to what you can call the tier one expensive build. But I mean, this is, still has the core cards, and this
Mm,
can still, do a lot of damage and can still get you quite far.
yeah.
I mean, people always think immediately if it's budget, it can't be good. But a lot of these budget decks, I honestly believe, could actually get you quite decently. I mean, they might not get you top 100 legend, but a lot of these will probably get you rank 5 or possibly legend if you play them well.
Yeah. And I think with this one in particular, it's like a slightly different build that we don't see that common anymore with Jade Druid. Because, this isn't including any epics, we're not including a card like Ultimate Infestation, which has largely kind of replaced the previous iterations that had Gadgets and Auctioneer in. So, this deck is using Gadgets and Auctioneer as more of its late game way of generating a lot more resources and getting cards in hand. Obviously, with all these decks, we're going to kind of mention some key cards that are great to add if you do have them. Aya is the obvious answer for any Jade decks, and quite until the sort of mean streets of Gadgets and rotates out, Aya is a relatively good craft. It's solid in pretty much any of the classes you want to play a Jade deck for. You will want to play Aya. Obviously, that's just Shaman, Rogue, or Druid. And then when it comes to cards like Ultimate Infestation, the trick with fitting those kind of cards in is these decks are largely built to, not have that kind of a card in. So what you would want to do with a card like Ultimate Infestation is you'd probably want to be replacing the Gadgets and Auctioneers. You want to find something that's fulfilling that same kind of role in the deck, which in this case is replenishing your cards, allowing you to draw a bunch of cards, basically. And that's the
Yeah.
main role of Ultimate Infestation most of the time with Jade Druid. The one other big thing to bear in mind is that with this version of Jade Druid, I think you have to consider a lot more carefully whether you're using Nourish for ramp or draw a lot of the time.
Yeah.
With the Ultimate Infestation version, very often you just ramp up, and then hit your Ultimate Infestation, and then you're sorted for resources and you're miles ahead in terms of mana. That's one of the big changes that Ultimate Infestation has brought to the Jade Druid deck, and what has made it so powerful. Whereas with this deck, you have to be a little bit more conservative because you need to actually find the pieces to go with a card like Gadgets and Auctioneer in order to get the draw. Your Earthen Scales, your Jade Idols, your Mark of the Lotus, or even your Wild Growth with its excess mana. Those are obviously really good ways of drawing with Gadgets and Auctioneer. So you want to actually be able to find those kind of cards to pair with the Gadgets and so it's a little bit more um, not as guaranteed. Let's say your draw with a deck like this versus something like the tier one Jade Druid that has the ultimate infestation. So those are some kind of differences you have to bear in mind. If you're watching streamers playing Jade Druid, they might always ramp up aggressively, and with the deck like this, that might not be the best plan all the time.
Yeah, the thing is, like you said, I think that the fact that you have to plan your auctioneer turns a lot more carefully, I think this actually makes this version a lot more skill intensive in actually to play. You know,
Mm,
having to make those decisions of, do I play the spell now? Do I save it for auctioneer? Do I need to, having to manage your cards and resources a lot more carefully than, like you say. with the tier one version, you can just basically ramp, ultimate infestation, recover all those cards, and you're
Yeah.
good to go.
Yeah, and obviously with a deck like this as well, it has Druid of the Claw, which is obviously a very good card for newer players. You know, classic card. I imagine not going to see Hall of Fame rotation anytime soon.
No,
So it is definitely something that is a good card to have, and it's pretty solid in almost all Druid decks, really. And in
yep.
this case, it's also quite versatile. You know, it's interesting to know when sometimes it's better to use it for charge, essentially kind of as removal, or just using it for its taunt and value. So, you know, those are a lot of the interesting decisions that you have to make. Do you have any other cards that you think might improve this Jade Druid?
Well, okay. I mean, general cards, the kind of cards that if you have, for example, you would probably put in. So obviously you've said Aya, um, cards like Lich King.
Yeah?
Lich King. We could probably be talking about Lich King a bit, but that's kind of a legendary that in most mid-range slow decks, you can probably put if you happen to have opened him, you can probably put him in your deck and he's going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Even in decks where the tier one version doesn't actually run it, it will still give you pretty good value. If you're lacking some of the
S-
other cards.
So what would you take out for Lich King?
That's I would probably.
The
It's quite.
a Spreading Plague,
I mean,
Druid of the
the problem
Claw.
Spring Plague is
Those are
really
the
good.
two. Those are the two kind of cards that maybe stick out to me. Or maybe
I mean,
even drop a
maybe one
Tar Creeper.
could drop maybe a Tar Keeper, maybe a Maya Keeper. I mean,
No, I think the ramp is good
although
if
you
you
need the
have
ramp.
the Lich King as well, because it's another thing to ramp to. I think it might be something like Tar Creeper, really. I think
Yeah,
Tar
Tar
Creeper would probably be
Keeper,
the
Drill
number
the
one
Claw,
thing I would
maybe.
drop. I wouldn't want to drop both of them, but
Yeah,
I would gladly drop one for something like the Lich King.
yeah. So like I said, like Lich King, I think is a solid. Even cards, other cards that I don't know if it really fits into Jade Druid, but although it might, is Primordial Drake, which
Yeah,
also help is pretty. And once again, you might want to drop some combination of Tar Creepers and Drew the Claw, because I mean it is a big late game taunt that helps generally stabilize your board as well as bigger
giving you some
a
board
beefy
clear. Yeah,
taunt. Yeah. If you have Malfurion, obviously you're gonna put Malfurion in.
yeah,
And Fandral, I think those are. Although I think Fandral's rotating soon.
yeah. But Fandral, I would probably take Druid of the Claw out specifically for Fandral over Tar Creeper.
Yeah,
Like if I only had Fandral and none of the other cards you mentioned, I'd take out the Druid of the Claw because it's actually quite nice to curve Tar Creeper into Fandral. It can make a huge difference to keeping your Fandral alive and getting the extra value. Whereas the
yeah,
Druid of the Claw, even though it's an extra choose one value, it's very hard to actually get it with Fandral in the same turn.
yeah.
Yeah, so you could also sometimes drop a single Jade Blossom if your deck ends up a little bit more mid-range, but I think most of the options you're talking about are more like on the expensive side of things.
Yeah.
Blumage Talnos is also something that could sometimes come into the deck to help you if you're
Well,
facing lots of like zoo type decks. You know, Thalnos Swipe is pretty powerful.
yeah.
Um,
Well, even Thanos Wrath is pretty good.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, yeah. It's tough to because I mean when you look at this and it's obviously it's going for complete like a slightly different strategy to your traditional board. So you got to kind of
yeah,
see which synergies are there, which ones you kind of rely on to not die. You know.
yeah. Okay, let's move on to pretty much everyone's favorite budget pick, and the one you generally end up recommending to newer players, and that is Midrange Hunter.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a deck. A lot of the powerful hunter cards are really in that common or at rare at most slot. You know, I mean Savannah Highmane, often joked as the hunter legendary because most of the hunter legendaries are quite bad, and
Yep.
so Savannah Highmane is kind of that's the big top end scary card in your decks. And the nice part of it being a rare is you can have two. So obviously a very solid card. And this, there's also a bunch of useful cards like Animal Companion. You know, that's something you always see in your tier one hunter decks. Alley Cat as well right now. Crackling Razormaw. A lot of things in that common to rare slot.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, and that's what I mean. Hunter. That's what the core.
yeah,
The core is.
yeah. There's really not a lot of epics and legendaries that you would necessarily want in hunter.
Yeah.
This deck has some interesting choices. Cards like Deadly Shot and Unleash the Hounds. Things that are not seeing as much play right now. The Galaka Crawler is obviously also a bit of a tech choice, but right now it's pretty good because of the prevalence of decks like Tempo Rogue that run quite a lot of pirates. So obviously that's
Yeah.
pretty good. Vicious Fledgling also gives you some uh, like blowout games, especially even if you go like Thunder Rhino Vicious Fledgling in the late game, that can be pretty good.
Yeah.
And then
I mean,
obviously,
Vicious Fledgling by himself can win games.
yeah. Ooh, did you just gender Vicious Fledgling? That's rude.
Yeah, I think
Um,
I did. Yeah,
and
Vicious
then
Fledgling, yes.
and
My
then
bad.
Bone Mare is obviously one of the most powerful commons. Well, probably one of the best crafts right now. If you ever craft a common, which ideally you shouldn't have to, but it's one of the commons you definitely want to have two of. It goes in so many decks, and it's obviously very very powerful, and it's probably a budget player's best friend right now.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, while we're talking about, as we've already talked about, Tar Creeper, Bone Mare, and the card you're going to see in some of the other decks later, Cobalt Scalebane, are probably the three commons that right now are free-to-play players' best friend, because
Yeah.
those three cards see play in between those three, see play nearly every single tier one deck,
And all
and
three of them see play in Tempo Rogue.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Some decks you see all of them. Some of them you see two of them. I mean, a lot of decks have Cobalt Scalebane and Bone Mare.
Yeah.
Star Keeper is obviously like a slower anti-aggro card, whereas Bone Mare is such a versatile card because you can use it as a defensive option and an aggressive option.
Yeah, for any deck where your game plan is to be on the board, especially in the mid game,
Yeah,
that's really where Bone Man comes into. You can't really use it in, let's say, a control deck where you're not expecting to be on the board. That's the one kind of caveat. Something like Tar Creeper is often better for those kind of control decks as a way to slow your opponent's development on the board. Whereas Bone Mare, you need to be on the board going into turn 7, and obviously it's something at the moment you always want to play around, especially against classes like Rogue, not allowing them to have something on the board going into their turn 7. You'll often hear streamers talking about that Bone Mare turn.
yeah, and that's why a mistake is sometimes the majority of times currently it's correct to like completely overtrade just to clear the board for turn 7.
Yeah.
You might waste 5 damage or 6 damage or maybe even 10 damage just to get rid of a small minion so that Bone Mare doesn't get value.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely an upper ceiling on that damage, which we've had some interesting discussions in some of the games we played. But
Yeah,
yeah, what would you suggest to improve this mid-range hunter? Like if players
there's
happen to have
actually
the
not
cards.
that many cards. I mean, the one card that if you do have, if you got it from the Lich King, if you got Deathstalker Rexar, Deathstalker Rexar, what's really nice is it acts as a bit of removal, but what it allows you to do is it allows the hunter deck to go a little bit more for the long game.
Yeah.
So allows you to basically, instead of just relying on the hunter hero power to deal damage, all of a sudden now you just generate infinite value. Against slower control decks, that's insane. Where basically, you click the hero power and then you build a beast. So you get two
Mm,
options. The first one has text on it. The other one can have text or can be vanilla.
yeah.
And you get the combined stats, which can be really strong.
Yeah, so what would you replace? The first card that kind of sticks out to me is Unleash the Hounds because in some ways they fulfill similar kind of um, board clearing roles in a way because of Deathstalker Rexar's, battle cry type effect when he deals 2 damage to
I
enemy
mean,
minions,
Unleash
etc.
maybe. I would even honestly, considering cutting the cards like like Jolt McCall, because
Yeah.
because I mean that card by itself obviously adds a beast, but I mean if you have Deathstalker X, so you don't
You
really.
don't need Jewel McCall for the value, no. But I think the question
Yeah,
still remains is do you need Jewel McCall just to have a more reliable one drop, especially
yeah,
for
it's
your Crackling
possible.
Razormaw follow up? And when you only have the two drops in the form of Hyena and Razormaw, I think I'm reluctant to cut the Jewel McCall because you want to make sure you nail that one drop
Yeah.
into two drop there because of how reliant your two drops are basically on you having the
Another
one drops.
cards that you can cut, and this goes through a lot of debate amongst the top players, is like, for example, you could go down to one Bone Mare if you run the Deathstalker XL, because
Yeah.
a lot of the pro lists, they will never, a lot of them don't actually run double Harmade, double Bone Mare, and like Deathstalker XL. Some lists were running one Harmade, one Bone Mare for a while,
Yes.
so you probably want to replace a bone mare. You might like if you're running Deathstalker Rex, so you might want to actually replace a bone mare for it.
Yeah, especially if
Uh,
you're facing lots of aggro decks or lots of early game focus decks. You don't need the extra value. The Deathstalker Rexar is enough value, so you don't
yeah,
need the extra Bone Mare as well, and it can kind of help you make sure your hands are not that clunky.
yeah. So and
Thunder
then some.
Thunder Rhino is also another option for replacing, but
The
maybe
problem is a 5 drop.
yeah,
There you'd probably replace that with Cobalt Scalebanes.
yeah, yeah, maybe
That's in terms of 5 drop for 5 drop. Cards, if you do so, if you do so, obviously because rotation is happening with the next expansion, I wouldn't suggest grinding Karazhan. But if you have Karazhan, Kindly Grandmother is actually it's a common card from
yeah,
One Night in Karazhan. That's a really strong 2 drop.
yeah,
It's just such a sticky minion. It's so difficult because a lot of times your opponent's got to decide, do they want to kill it to give you a 3-2 just so you don't get like Crackling Razor more or some like sort of high master value, or do they leave it as a 1-1? It's such an annoying minion to deal with.
yeah, and that's something I would definitely be okay with cutting the Jeweled Macaw for, because
Yeah,
now you're putting in a more solid 2 drop that isn't as reliant on the 1 drops. You like the only other 2 drop you have, I suppose, that you can just play very often is go like a crawler against decks where you know they don't have pirates, but yeah.
yeah.
And
And
maybe
then
Unleash
epic,
is also worth cutting if you just wanted to cut one Jeweled Macaw, but yeah, go on.
then some epics that if you happen to have them, I wouldn't put these as high priority to craft, but if you have cards like Rat Pack or Call of the Wild, that's also an option. Rat Pack is it's a probably solid 3 drop, so you could probably consider dropping like Unleash the Hound for Rat
Yeah.
Pack.
Or even
Um,
Deadly Shot if
Even
meta
Deadly Shot.
is very like zoo oriented.
Uh, Call of the Wild, you'd probably want to replace like a Bowmare or even maybe something in your top end because obviously Call of the Wild is it's quite a 9 mana spell. You know,
Yeah.
it's heavy. It's right at the top end.
Yeah, I think a general rule for when you're replacing cards to try and improve a deck is try to find things that are either in the same kind of curve slot or in the same function. So something like
Yeah,
Bone Mare is giving you extra value. That's why we can replace it with Deathstalker Exile, as well as being in the same kind of curve slots. And that's why even like Unleash the Hounds and Deathstalker Exile, we were comparing because they both do something similar, and that's help you against wide boards. But obviously they're very different in when they come down in terms of their curve.
yeah. You want to be very careful about just cutting all the early cards and then putting in all your top cards because you obviously want to play something early on.
Yeah,
And
that's
this is
why I
a
like
mistake a lot
cutting
of
the
new
dual
players make.
macaw for something like Deathstalker XR doesn't feel as good.
Yeah, it doesn't feel as good. Although sometimes it depends also, what like a lot of these decks are obviously very general builds, and then you would have to as an individual decide, okay, what are you trying to tech it towards, and what we mean by tech is, what kind of deck are you trying to beat a little bit more consistently. So if you, for example, facing lots of aggro, you would probably, I mean, from this list, you would probably replace the Deadly Shot with the second Unleash the Hounds would be the first sort of thing you did again if you're facing more aggressive decks because they tend to
Mm.
have a number of minions and Deadly Shot is obviously not as good.
Yeah, it's like against your zoos and those kind of things.
Exactly. You don't want to spend 3 minutes to kill a 1-1.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else, or can we move on from
Yeah, I
Hunter?
think I think we covered most.
Okay. So coming to Mage, which is very
Oh, sorry.
often.
Before we go, so
Yep.
Carl, we forgot, and but it's not Hydra.
Ah, yes, Bitterside Hydra.
Uh,
That's something that neatly replaces the Thunder Rhinos, I would say,
yeah,
in terms of
a 5
curve
mana
and
8/8. It's a beast.
yeah,
I think it. So yeah, so I forgot. I just remember that now. So that would replace Thunder Rhino straight up. I think.
yeah. I'd gladly put 2 Bitterside Hydras in for Thunder Rhinos.
Yeah.
Okay, then moving on to Mage, which is kind of one of the classes that is very often the uh, the first go-to class for budget for new players, because obviously a lot of the basic Mage cards like your Fireballs, Water Elementals, Arcane Intellect, Frostbolt, they're obviously pretty powerful cards.
Yep.
So you see them in honestly most Mage decks, except maybe the Water Elemental. That one's a bit more situational. So Mage is very often a go-to deck for new players, and in this case we have a Secret Mage to look at. So it's a mage built around the the secret synergy with cards like Cabal Lackey, Kirin Tormage, the Cabal Crystal Runner, and then using secrets like Counterspell and Mirror Entity, which give you generally good tempo options. Also has Archaeologist as well to fetch secrets.
And also
So
just
yeah,
so just to add to the counterspell mirror entity, a lot of times they're meant to be the way you play this deck is to be as disruptive as possible. So the problem with playing against mirror entity and counterspell is that they trigger off two different things. So
hmm
obviously mirror entity triggers off your playing a minion, counterspell triggers off a spell. So your opponent constantly has to decide, which one are they gonna, especially if it's the first secret you've played of the game, you know, do they risk playing a big minion or do they risk playing a big spell? And like, it's so difficult to try and figure out,
yeah,
which one it is, and you have to sometimes just take the gamble and hope it's the other one.
yeah. So one quick thing, we don't want to go through the lists in their entirety. We're just kind of mentioning some of the key cards, but I will put the link to all these decks in the description on YouTube, as well as yeah, in the description wherever you find this podcast. So yeah, you can go there to get the exact lists. As it kind of doesn't really help telling people every card, as they can just go and copy paste the deck codes these days.
Yeah. Just cards that you can consider replacing. So if you do have Karazhan, Babbling Book and Madi's Valet are both very pretty good cards,
Yep.
especially Madi's Valet. It's a Frostbolt with and the fact that you run the secrets, it's got that synergy. Deal 3 damage and develop a 2/3 is very powerful
Yeah.
a lot of times. And then if you've got more
What would
expensive cards,
what would you replace with Medivh's Valet? Because I think that's something a lot of players will have. I personally think you could replace something like the Cold Wraith.
yeah, I would replace a Cold Wraith first,
Yeah.
and then for like Babbling Books, I would replace the Cabal Lackeys.
Yeah.
And then another card that we see is very good in Mage is Primordial Glyph.
Yeah.
It's a 2 mana spell, epic. So that you could probably replace either the Cold Wrath. If you happen to have all 6 of those cards, so Babbling Books, Medivh Valets, and Primordial Glyph, you probably want to replace the Lackeys, the Cold Wraiths, and probably the Water Elementals.
Yeah.
But in some combination, depending obviously on which cards you have. I mean, Primordial Glyph
You
is
might
just such a
also
good
drop a
Vista option.
Bone Mare for one of the
Yeah,
for Primordial Glyph. Let's say you
yeah, that's
play
possible too.
one Bone Mare, one Water Elemental, just to give you some slightly smoother curve options. Because the Primordial
Yeah,
Glyph can hopefully find you value.
yeah, man. Can also the nice thing is it can find you extra burn, it can find you removal. It's such a versatile card.
Yeah.
But yeah, this deck is pretty strong.
Yeah, it does look pretty good. Another card that's also pretty good to include in the deck is Pyros, if you happen to have Pyros.
Oh
Once
yes.
again, something that could replace Cold Wraith. I think Pyros has been included in a lot of tier 1 um, secret mages. One of the biggest problems with secret mages is they can tend to run out of cards sometimes, run out of
Yeah.
value, and Pyros really does help with that. Thalnos is also another card that can come in, especially for something like Cold Wraith. Gives you some more options with some of your burn spells, and obviously does have that Death Rattle draw a card that helps you.
You
Sorry.
can also, I mean, Tar Creeper once again. You can always
Yeah.
try fit space for it if you are worried about aggressive decks.
Yeah, if you're not
Uh,
finding that your Cold Wraiths are great on curve, I think this deck's not very often meant to play Cold Wraith on curve, because you're meant to go Water Elemental, attack with the Water Elemental, and then play Cold Wraith, really, to get the
oh
card
yeah,
draw a lot of the time. But if let's say your Cold Wraiths are, you're always having to play them on curve and they're not that effective, a Tar Creeper could be a good replacement for them.
yeah.
Uh,
So and also another card. Oh, it just slipped my mind. Oh, Kabbalah's Tomb is a card that it's kind of always controversial in Secret Mage because Secret Mage is trying to be obviously more tempo orientated, but it is
yeah.
a possibility if you're trying to go for the longer game.
Yeah, personally, I'm
Uh,
not a fan of it. Maybe you replace like a Cabal Lackey or something, but then you're going for a more grindy version of the
yeah,
deck.
so that's how you decide to how you decide to tune a deck
Yeah, if you went
essentially.
for a more grindy, like I think you can build if you have cards like that and Frostlich Jaina, you can build a bit more of a grindy version. I suppose you could also always just put Frostlich Jaina in this deck as an option for the late game.
Yeah,
With replacing
if you
Bone
have
Mare,
her, put
Bone
it
Mare
in.
would be the obvious replacement there once again for me, as
Yeah,
well as Archmage Antonidas. I would replace Bone Mare with Archmage Antonidas happily,
yeah, yeah, definitely.
especially if you have the Primordial Glyphs. That just makes Antonidas even better.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, okay, Anything else for Mage before we move on?
I think I covered most of it.
Cool. Next we have quite an interesting Paladin deck. Not something we kind of see very often. It's not really a common archetype in terms of the tier 1 Paladins, and that's largely because Murloc Paladin, which is kind of the tier 1 Paladin, it has quite a lot of epics in. So that's why it's difficult to build that if you don't have cards like War Leader and Vilefin Inquisitor. Um, so it can be a little bit more difficult to build that. So what we have here is we have a Divine Shield hand buff Paladin. So not something people are going to be expecting, that's for sure. And it has cards like Rallying Blade that synergizes with the Divine Shield's Howling Commanders as well to draw them. Your Righteous Protectors, your Argent Commanders. Um, what else has Divine Shield? Oh, the Argent Squire, Argent Protector as well to help give minions Divine Shield, and even Doppelgangster as well for that hand buff synergy. You know, Doppelgangster, Saronite Chain Gang, alongside cards like Grimestreet Outfitter and Grimestreet Enforcer. When they're
And
buffed up in
Smuggler's
your
Run.
hand, and Smuggler's Run, yeah. When they're buffed up in your hand, then all of a sudden playing 5 mana for 3/3/3s is really powerful. Same with Saronite Chain Gang playing 4 mana for, let's say, 2/3/4s. So, you know,
Yeah.
those are kind of the real value you can get. And it has cards like Acolyte of Pain and Stonehill Defender to give you some extra value in the late game as well. Acolyte obviously just help you draw some more cards, and Stonehill can give you those Tyrians and Sunky
So
Batariums if you don't have them.
and moving on to wishes. If you have either of those cards, you'd
Yeah,
probably put them in.
yeah. I would probably just replace Argent Commando with Tyrion. Uh, Maybe even
Yeah.
if I had Tyrion and Sunkeeper, I'd probably replace one Argent Commander, one Bone Mare, or maybe
Yeah.
even Doppelgangster and Argent Commander. But you don't want like Tarium is a really good card, but it does go a little bit against the hand buff theme of the deck. So
Right. Yeah.
that's the only concern for something like that. Another card that goes well in this deck if you have it is Corpse Taker. Uh, because
Yes.
of obviously already having cards with the taunt and divine shield, it would at least come down with taunt and divine shield. And if it comes down with any buffs as well, that's added bonus. That's a card that could probably replace something like Doppelgangster, I think. Um,
Yeah.
and
And even
also, it's also it could make you include something like the Stormwatcher.
yeah, I
Uh,
was about to say is if you do have the corpse takers, cards like Stormwatcher then become potential includes or what's it the Grookful Master.
yeah, Grookfu.
If
Yeah,
you have a
to
card, if you have
replace
something like
stuff like Doppelgangster and Argent Commander. I'd kind of, if I had two of, let's say, two uh, Stormwatchers and two um, Corpse Takers that I wanted to put in, I think those would be some of the cards I'd want to replace. Maybe even
and also
Argent Protector.
if you have Wicker Flame's also
Yeah,
very good. A 3 mana 2/2 with Taunt, Divine Shield, and Lifesteal was pretty solid.
yeah,
And obviously it's got that extra synergy with the Corpse Takers.
yeah. And for that, I'd probably replace something like Howling Commander, just to give you.
Mm.
It's sort of comparable on curve and pretty high value. Yeah, and that's another thing Stonehill Defender can give you as well. Stonehill Defender is one of your best friends as a budget player when you're playing Paladin. That's for sure.
Yep, definitely.
Anything else that you can think of that's good for
Oh, Bone.
replacing?
I mean, Cobalt Scalebanes. Also
Yeah,
a card I think, could probably fit into it. Especially it's got the synergy with just simply the hero power.
yeah,
It can turn every 1/1 into a pretty beefy guy.
yeah. What would you replace? I think I might
I would
consider
go for the
replacing something.
Enforcer.
Yeah, Grime Screen Enforcer. That's what I was
That
gonna
would
say
be
as
my
well.
first go-to. Maybe
Because
Doppelgangster. It
no,
depends.
Doppelgangster's actually quite nice because it gives you more cards on the
Bodies.
more bodies on the board for cards
Mm,
like Bone Mare and for that Cobalt Scalebane. So you kind of got to think of those synergies
yeah.
when you're trying to decide how to fit in that. Another thing you could do with the deck like this is maybe go a little bit of a Prince Keleseth route if you have Prince Keleseth. Drop the Argent Protectors and Grime Street Outfitter and play Prince Keleseth and then bring in any of the other cards we've discussed.
And
Or
probably a few more one drops as well.
yeah, or just some more one drops. Maybe a smuggler's what's it? Small time recruits if you have. It's going a
Oh
little bit
yes.
more of the aggressive. Like let's say you played Prince Killer Sith, two more one drops and small time recruits. That could go a more aggressive variant of the deck.
Then
Uh,
you'd throw in like Divine Favor if you had it probably as well.
yeah, Divine Favor could also replace the small time recruits. Those would both
Yeah.
be kind of options. Well, which kind of one drops would you look out to add to a deck like this?
I'm just trying to think because this one has a lot of the one drops as well. So I'm just trying to think what
Well,
other good
yeah, it
one
has
drops are there.
three.
I mean, besides Righteous Protector, Ardent
Um,
Squire, Firefly,
Glacial Shard.
Glacial Shard is potentially. I mean,
The Arceus
Arcus
veteran.
Veteran.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
veteran's not bad as well.
yeah. I mean, we're basically kind of thinking of a lot of one drops that are in Zoo these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are decent one drops. Anything that can also give you synergy from um, either being buffed up or any of the like Divine Shield synergy. But I mean, we pretty much already got the two Divine Shield uh, one drops, the Argent Squire and Righteous Protector. So those are some kind of directions you can take the deck to make it a bit more powerful.
Yep.
Okay, and next we have the Inner Fire Priest. So obviously the big priest, well, not big priest, but the the main priest that is on ladder these days is Razakis priest, with the big priest now being the new contender. And both of those decks are very expensive, quite a lot of legendaries. I wouldn't.
Yeah. And epics.
Razakis priest is quite a good deck if you just have the three core legendaries, or even just Raza the chained. I think it's the chained or is it unchained? I always forget.
It's the chained. I always thought it was
The
the
chained.
unchained. It was actually
Yeah.
the chained.
Razor the Chained and Shadow Reaper Anduin. Obviously, that if you have those two, you can put in a lot of card draw, just card draw and removal, and you can kind of make a decent Highlander uh, Razakis Priest there. Obviously, Kazakus and those kind of cards improve it as well. But looking at this, it's a very different build. We're going with the Inner Fire or the Divine Spirit's Inner Fire game plan here as a way to win with
Yeah.
cards like Power Word Shield to buff up,
And
Cabal Talon Priest, and also just some base high health minions like Totalan Shell Razor. There's also Power Word Tentacles, a card that doesn't see much play, but if
yeah.
you manage to land something, stick that Power Word Tentacles on it, and then go for the Divine Shield Inner Fire, that can be really powerful.
Divine. I mean, I was gonna say Divine Shield. I mean, Divine Spirit and Inner Fire is one of those combos that have been in Hearthstone since the beginning of days.
Yeah.
Uh, like right in the beginning. So it is it constantly comes. You'll see even a lot of some of the other competitive decks occasionally put the package in. So like your Dragon Priest decks tend to
Yep.
sometimes put this in. Silence Priest almost always runs Inner Fire and Divine Shield combo,
Well, I
Divine
mean,
Spirit combos.
that's what the deck is built around, so yeah.
Yeah, the deck, well, that's in silence. But like Dragon Priest sometimes includes a small package just so, out of the blue you can hit with, you can turn your, your bookworm, you
Yeah.
can all of a sudden just kill them out of nowhere.
Yeah. Speaking of
So,
Silence Priest, you could kind of take this deck in a little bit more Silence Priest direction, going for some of those cheaper um, minions that need to be silenced in order to kind of have a chance of attacking. Obviously, the Humongous Razor Leaf is the main thing, Ancient Watcher,
yeah.
the traditional one, and then obviously if you do have it, Faceless,
Purify.
uh, no, the Faceless Shambler.
Shambler, oh yes.
Those are the like I would say if you have Faceless Shambler, then you can go that direction a little bit more with your priest. But if not, then this could be a more reliable priest to just often win with getting on board. This isn't a deck that's looking to OTK them with the combo as much as something like Silence Priest with the Humongous Razor Leafs and whatnot. This is a deck
Yeah.
that, it has minions that can attack anyway. It fights for board, has cards like Holy Nova to give you a lot of value if you're already on the board. Healing up your minions, damaging theirs, allowing you to get some really good trades. Spirit Lash as well. This is a lot more of like a mid-rangey deck that fights for board, uses cards like Power
Mm.
Word Tentacle, and then sometimes just has some big burst in that in a Divine Spirit in a fire combo, and then has cards like Silence, which is largely I think meant to be used to silence taunts, so you can get through for your lethal. That's
Yeah.
also kind of what role Mass Dispel fills. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like, so this particular, so of all the decks we've covered, this immediately there's a lot of slots that are like very easy to replace. Like if you have the cards, like I can already spot about half a dozen, like what,
Yeah,
quite
but
a few cards.
the tricky thing with this is quite far away from anything we're seeing as like a tier 1 priest.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to kind of just start slotting in tier 1 priest cards because you start losing the identity of the deck a little bit. And that's something you do have to consider when kind of building or editing, improving a deck like this. Acolyte of Agony is kind of one of the things that really sticks out to me as a card that could be replaced.
For me, it's Night Howler. Like I feel like you're not
Yeah,
like
Night Howler.
Night Howler and Power Tentacles.
Yeah,
You know,
I think Power with Tentacles is pretty important to give you value if you stick things to the board. Um, I'd be reluctant to replace Power with Tentacles, to be honest. Otherwise, I do think you're kind of changing the deck entirely. Night Howler, though, it is a decent minion, but you kind of have to hit the buff on it in the same turn you play it. Otherwise,
yeah.
it can be kind of weak. It's definitely a slot that could be filled with other options.
So the kind of card, like, so obviously you got to be careful, but like good priest cards if you have them. So from Karazhan, you have Priest of the Feast, which is quite helpful,
Yeah,
especially with all the spells.
I'd definitely replace Night Howler with Priest of the Feast. That would
Yeah,
be
because
pretty
Priest of the
solid.
Feast, first of all, it's got the high health, but also just the ability can easily, sometimes just get you out of, burn range.
Yeah,
And cards like, Curious Glimmerroot, Dragonfire Potion, Shadow Visions. Shadow Visions is a very powerful card. I think that definitely this deck would want.
yeah.
Allows you to find multiple copies of your, whether it's removal or whether it's, extra combo pieces, so like an extra Divine Spirit or extra Inner Fire.
What would you
Uh,
replace with Shadow Visions? I think that's quite an interesting. You don't
I
really
would
want to
drop
take out a
like
minion.
I would take like Master Spell
Yeah,
and probably the Defender of Argus.
maybe. Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
Defender obviously is kind of situational because you have to have minions on board, and that is a problem sometimes for priest decks. So yeah, I think
yeah,
you could definitely cut those two. Even maybe cutting one power with tentacles for
yeah.
the Shadow Visions if you have them. That
Curious
that could also
Glimmerroot.
work.
No, that's an interesting card. You could probably replace, I think, the Acolyte of Agonies because they're both 3 drops.
Yeah.
Um, but Curious Glimmerroot is one of those cards that actually, even though it's a discover effect, it's one of those rewarding. It's one of those cards that rewards a player for their knowledge, because a lot of times, depending on what rank you're playing, a lot of times what your opponent's playing.
Yep.
And so a card like Curious Glimmerroot, for you to get the full value out of it, it actually kind of forces you to know, okay, I'm playing against this deck. What cards are probably in it?
Yeah.
And
It does help you pay more attention to what your opponent's playing and
yep,
kind of forces you in a way to learn the popular lists that you're seeing a little bit more, which can be a very important thing to help improve your win rate overall. It's something that, like, knowing how to use Curious Glimmerroot, knowing how to play it, knowing how to pick can actually improve your play when you're playing with other non-priest decks.
yeah, because you remember what cards they might have in the deck.
Yeah, so you kind of can have some idea of what you should play around, what you shouldn't. So, yeah, Clearest Glimmerloot, it can be a good card for newer players. Not something I'd run out and craft though for something like
Yeah.
this, for a deck like this.
Also, Curious Glimmerroot also has the advantage of giving you a lot of information sometimes. So it's obviously if you pick the right one, you know, that gives you the information that's in the deck. But the important information as well is the fact that the 2 other cards aren't in the deck. And so sometimes you'll get it where, out of the 3 options, one is clearly in the deck and 2 are, just garbage. But there are actually times where, the 3 cards are actually all plausible in that particular list.
Yeah.
And then, you kind of have to then work out, okay, which kind of list is that deck leaning towards,
Yeah. So, any kind of legendaries that you would put in here? I mean, we could definitely put in something like Lich King to replace Defender of Argus or Night Howler. Probably
Yeah.
Defender of Argus because you want to keep your curve a little bit.
Shadow Reaper Anduin is probably still good.
Yeah.
Even though you don't really have the complete synergy, it's probably still good.
Yeah.
Uh,
What about Elise?
pro-
If you
Elise
are going to be playing Shadow Visions, Elise can
or
give you some
Lara
extra
as
value.
well.
Lyra, yeah.
Uh,
Lyra can give you some extra value, especially with all the spells you
Primordial
have.
Drake, I think. Primordial Drake I actually also pretty like
Yeah.
in a deck like this, because first of all it keeps you alive, but that high health also allows you to combo quite effectively.
Yeah, so Primordial
Uh,
Drake, what would you replace? Maybe a
I would drop
Master
the power
Spell
with I would
and a
drop the
Power
power with
Tentacle.
tentacles.
Yeah.
Like for me, I would drop those.
Okay.
But
I,
yeah,
th- I think that reduces a lot of your early blowouts if you take them both away. Maybe
but I think
the
it's more
Master Spell
consistent
and the
though.
Power Tentacles.
Yeah, it's
Like one,
possible.
keep one Power Tentacles. I think it's easy to cut this deck to one Power Tentacles. Is kind of where I'm getting.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think. I mean, you could also,
Bittertide
depending on what
Hydra?
you're facing. I
I
don't. I
mean,
don't know. I don't
seriously,
know.
because you can just Divine Spirit into fire and it's a 16/16. You can silence it first if you don't want to take the damage. I think Bittertide
It's
Hydra is
possible, but
completely reasonable.
yeah, by the time if you have it, I mean, Cobalt Skull. I mean, Tar Creeper is probably still good in this deck. You know, if you, like once again anti aggro.
Yeah, it's a little bit
Uh,
surprising that Acolyte of Agony got a place over it, but I suppose the idea is you can buff the Acolyte of Agony with the powered shield and
and then
Divine Spirit
just
into fire, and then you can kind of race your opponents because you're always healing for so much, something like
yeah,
that. I don't know. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah. So Lich King we said, and I mean even yeah, I mean even like if you just have a random legendary that's good, with as Ysera, you know, Ysera is just a
Yeah.
randomly good
Yes, Sarah.
late game threat that also has the high health that allows you to combo with this deck.
Yeah, yes,
You know,
Sarah is
like
pretty good. So yeah, it does give you some kind of
late game.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Um, next we have a rogue deck. So obviously Tempo Rogue is kind of the most popular rogue deck right now, and this is kind of a budget version of an aggro Tempo Rogue deck. So obviously because it's budget, there's no Prince Keleseth, and if you do have Prince Keleseth, you probably want to look more at some of the tier 1 decks, and then you're just looking to find replacements for cards like Leroy, although that's always a good craft, I think, or usually a good craft, and some of the legendaries like that you
Like
do
Van
see.
Cleef as well.
Yeah, so we're not going to talk about this in the context of Keleseth. Let's assume
Yeah,
that you're never putting Keleseth in this deck, and then the some of the key cards. When you're not putting Keleseth, then all of a sudden you can play some classics like Defias Ringleader, Eviscerate. This deck also has Razor Petal Lasher for some extra synergy, which is something as well that Thalnos, if you do have, would be good to come into this deck.
mm.
And then it has a lot of the early drops, so cards like Arceus Veteran, Argent Squire, Firefly, Deckhand as well. Obviously synergizes well with the
If you have
Rogue
patches,
Hero power. Yeah, if you have patches, you could, and like Swashbucklers as well, you could definitely replace,
yeah,
let's say, the
Swashbucklers from
veterans
Karazhan.
with the that. Um, so
If you have
obviously,
Salt,
yeah, if
oh,
you have
excuse me,
South Sea Captain as well, yeah, you can
yeah,
go a
Salt
little bit
Caps.
more of a pirate base list. Naga Corsairs maybe as well. So there's definitely quite a lot of ways you can kind of take a tempo rogue. Like there's Vile Spine Slayer is obviously
Yeah,
another
Vast
one.
Bustler is another big miss,
That
and
that's a big sort of loss, and why this deck kind of aims to be a lot more aggressive than tempo oriented, because you don't have those huge tempo
yeah,
swings of like Vile Spine. Your big tempo swings in a deck like this are, let's say, Backstab, SI7 Agent in the early game, or something like Cobalt
Spellbreaker.
Scalebane and Bone Mare later. Yeah, Spellbreaker, but there's not a lot of decks right now that buff, unless you're playing up against that priest we just mentioned.
Yeah. But yeah, so Swashbuckler and Vast Slayer. I mean, you can also consider uh, what's it, Bittertide Hydra once again.
Yeah, Better Side Hydra
Um,
is good in this deck.
also, and this is, you know, we saw some tier one play as well, but a potential direction you can also go if you have Karazhan is with the Curator. Like and then you run also cards like we mentioned previously, but Vicious Fledglings.
Yeah,
That's another
and
potential way. I think
even
it's probably
the
still quite
Cold Light
budget.
Oracle. That's
Yeah,
that's
it's a
usually
rare.
the token Murloc. You play like one Cold Light Oracle
Yeah,
as
I
a
mean
way
you
to
have the
get card draw.
beasts. I mean, what are your beasts? Yeah, your Galactic Crawlers, your beasts.
Yeah. So some of the other like legendaries you could play, let's say like Sherazin, still can be pretty decent, especially with the Razor Petal Lashes. It gives
Yeah,
you a decent chance to be able to resurrect your Sherazin. Probably could
Ken
just
is
cut
pretty good.
Spellbreaker for that. Yeah, Ken is pretty much standard. Well,
Ken Bloodhook. Yeah,
Ken is it's standard in a lot of the tier one decks right now. In the let's say the main variant of the deck, he's standard, and then
Lich King.
also Lich King comes in quite often,
Yeah,
uh, and kind of Kayn, you could probably cut some of your early game for cards like Kayn and Lich King, maybe the Arceus veterans, and then go a little bit
Yeah.
more value oriented. You can kind of lean the deck that way. This is kind of one of the exceptions to the you want to cut around your curve thing, because those kind of cards can allow you to lean the deck in a totally different direction.
And even maybe take out the device ringleaders as well. I mean, there's a possibility.
I think the ringleaders are actually quite important
Yeah.
for early game tempo.
Uh, uh,
You could also include, if you have them, preparation in a deck like this, and then you could also play like sap. For, let's say you don't have Vilespine Slayers, but you have preparations, you can play like prep sap instead of stuff like the Arceus veterans. And then if you have any of the other kind of tempo, or any of the other kind of bigger cards we were mentioning as well, you can definitely go a more value oriented tempo route, I think.
yeah. I mean, other cards as well. I mean, like, it's like we said, Swashbuckler, but also Hallucination is also not a bad. But once again, that's obviously angling towards a much slower game plan.
Yeah.
Because it's got the advantage of being a cheap spell that activates combo, as well as obviously you can find some really strong cards off of it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest inclusions we haven't actually spoken about that would just slide straight into this deck is Leroy.
Leroy, of
I think
course.
you
Yes.
would 100% put Leroy in here. You could even cut a Razor Petal Lasher maybe, because you'd kind of want to keep Spellbreaker, I think, in the same if
Yeah.
you have Leroy. Leroy obviously great with Cold Bloods, also great with Eviscerate. You can Leroy Eviscerate, that's another 10 damage for just 7 mana. So
And even you
Leroy
could probably Shadow
is pretty
Steps.
great. I
I mean,
don't
I
know
see
if
this.
I would play Shadow Step without Keleseth and Leroy and a lot of those other
Yeah.
key cards. Um,
I mean, it's still not bad with SR7 Agent, Plague
it's
Scientist.
not terrible, no, but yeah,
Not as much
I think
synergy,
you
obviously.
struggle to get as much value
Hmm.
from your Shadow Steps, and you're probably better just having more minions to play on curve, I think. But yeah, Leroy obviously a really good option if you do have Leroy. And a kind of budget version of Leroy that's been played in a lot of decks is Argent Commander. In particular, that's been played in the Corpse Taker variants of Tempo Rogue. So if you have Corpse Taker, you can maybe build for that a little bit with Argent Commanders for the Divine Shield. We already got the Argent Squires here, and you got the Tar Creepers for the Taunt. And then you can also play cards like Stormwatcher. You can play one Stormwatcher probably at most for
Yeah.
the Wind Fury, which has obviously got some really nutty potential with something like Cold Blood. So let's say the Corpse Taker package is 2 Argent Commanders and 2 Corpse Takers at a bare minimum, and 1 Stormwatcher. So that's 5 cards. So if I was going to find space in this deck, I'd probably look at the Razor Petal Lashes a little bit, the
Hmm.
Arceus Veteran, because once again we're going a little bit more of a value oriented route.
Yeah,
So
more
those are
range, yeah.
4 cards I could definitely see you cutting. And then Plague Scientist might even be cuttable. I've never been a huge fan of the card, to be honest, so I might just be a little bit biased here. But the thing is, with Rogue, you don't always have to. Rogue has probably one of the best or one of the best hero powers to always use on turn 2. Not daggering up on 2 can very often cost you a game, or very often should cost you a game, as Pandemonia can attest to. Especially with the previous popular versions of Rogue like Miracle Rogue. Okay, so moving on from Rogue, we have a budget Evolve Shaman. So this is obviously a deck,
Very similar.
yeah, that is not too far off the normal Evolve Shaman. Obviously doesn't have Thrall, which is something that can come in, but you have
Yeah.
Evolve, you have Serenite Chain Gang, Doppelgangster, you have the Jade package as well, and Thing from Below. So you've got your Jade package, Jade Claws, Jade Lightning, Jade Spirit. Obviously you can include something like Aya as well. You've also got Stonehill Defender, because there's also quite a lot of good taunt minions for Shaman that you can get, as well as some
Hot
of the new
Eyes,
strong ones.
Alakir.
Think from Below, yeah. And then
So basically,
yeah,
this
this
particular
deck
version,
is not too far off.
yeah, it's only missing really the legendaries, and also notably, it's missing the pirate package of Bloodsail, Corsairs, and Patches.
Yeah,
That's kind of I mean, the only difference between this and essentially a tier 1 list.
yeah.
Although Shaman's not doing particularly well at the moment, but I mean, it's just
Uh,
still, I mean, it's a good deck
and
still.
it's missing Maelstrom Portal because
Oh,
that's
Maelstrom Porter,
from
yes.
a
Charizard.
Karazhan, yeah. So if you've done Karazhan, Maelstrom Portal will definitely slide into this deck, and you could replace something like Ardent Squires, I think, for something like
Yeah, I think
Maelstrom
so.
Portal. Um, the Stonehill Defenders are also somewhat of a flex spot, I think, for replacing some of the other cards we talked about, like Aya and even the Thrall.
Thrall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you definitely don't want to. A lot of this early game is pretty solid. Like almost every single one of those, the shaman cards, I would say you want to keep in the deck as is. With two copies of all those, your Flame Tongue Totems, obviously strong Bloodlust. It's obviously a huge win condition for the deck. Think from below is so great. So
But unless you can go down to one, though, sometimes. You
you
can.
can, but it is a lot less reliable, I think.
Obviously,
If
yeah.
you're set on including a card like Lich King in the deck, which is not at all necessarily great for the deck, but if you just have Lich King and you want to put him in all your decks, you could cut one Bloodlust for Lich King. But I
And even
think
Bone
you'll
Mare
still win better or win more often.
win more. Win better.
Win, yeah, with
But Bone
Bloodlust.
Mare, sometimes some players also like Bone Mare because, I mean, it's also very good with Evolve.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you lose the buff, but the bone mare. If you trade off the minion you buff, then the bone mare works
yeah,
well
or
with it.
you trade and you heal it, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it works well with Thrall. I think it works better with Thrall than Evolve. But anyway,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, this is just a pretty solid deck. Maelstrom Portal, I think the honestly the biggest thing that's missing from this deck,
Yeah, definitely.
because that Devolve Maelstrom Portal in combination is so powerful against a lot of the other board-oriented aggro kind of decks, like Zoo, which is the next deck that we're going to be discussing. Zoo has traditionally been one of the best decks for newer players, and we have a budget Zoo here, which for those who don't know, Zoo is always kind of referring to Warlock Zoo. There's a lot of decks these days that are kind of Zoo-like, but traditionally, when we say zoo, we usually mean Warlock Zoo.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this deck has a lot of your cards that have been staples in Zoo for a long time. Flame Imp, Voidwalker,
Doom Guards.
yeah, Doomguard, and Knife Juggler as well, kind of making a return in this deck. Defender of Argus. Those are cards that have been staples for a long time in Zoo and not as popular right now. And then you also have cards like Fallen Sun Cleric, Direwolf Alpha, because this is once again a deck not taking the Prince Keleseth route, which is kind of the way that most of the modern Zoos are oriented. Also, another card that it's missing is Malkazar's Imp, to get some extra synergy from the discard, but the only real discard you have is the Doom Guard, so it's not entirely necessary.
You could
Um,
run Soulfires then, which I mean,
yeah,
if you do have Moxar Zemp, and like Silverware Golem is a possible, going a little bit more with the discard package. That's another possibility.
yeah, you could cut cards like the Fallen Sun Cleric, maybe even the Defender of Argus, maybe even the Knife Juggler if you had that. Uh, Other cards that you can include, I think one of the big ones that sticks out is Blood River Gul'dan for some extra
Yeah,
late
Blood
game
River
value.
Gul'dan.
Getting back Doom Guards and Despicable Dreadlords is really powerful. Uh,
And even Voidwalkers as
and
taunts.
yeah, Voidwalker can also be clutch. And Flame Imp coming back without its downside is pretty nice too. Any
Yeah,
other kind of key cards you would think?
I mean, potentially, I mean, you could still, once again, cards like Vicious Fledgling and Cobalt Skullbane go quite nicely into this deck.
Yeah,
If you miss any of the 5 drops or any of the 3 drops, those are pretty good inclusions.
yeah, I
I
think
mean, even Galactic Crawler can go in there as a 2 drop as well.
yeah, I think uh, those are very good options to replace. Let's say you don't have Despicable Dreadlord or Doomguard; those can be very good options, and they just kind of
Yeah.
change the way you play a little bit, but they can be pretty powerful. I mean, with these decks, players might be missing one or two rares, and those are definitely options that can come in. The Cobalt
Mm.
Scale Banes, the Vicious Fledglings, and such. Even something like Ravasaur Runt.
Yeah, Revs to runs.
If your
Yeah.
deck is board centric enough, maybe it can come in to replace something like Knife Juggler or Fallen Sun Cleric if you don't happen to have them. I'd kind of want to usually just replace a 2 drop with it. You
Yeah.
want to keep a large number, especially a large number of 1 drops if you're playing something like Ravis or Runt as well. Any other cards that stick out to you that are good to
I
include?
mean, once again, if you have like Patches and Blood Cell Corsairs.
Yeah.
Like most aggro decks, basically, like we said, or more early board-centric decks like your Evolve Shaman and your Zoo Warlock, you could always include the package, the Patches package. And even for a while, the Hunter decks even had included it
Yeah.
for a while, where they had Blood Cell Corsair. No, is it Blood Cell?
Yeah, Blood Cell
The one mana,
Corsair. Yes.
there's the 1 mana 1/2 and Patches.
Yeah, that's pretty much the bare minimum patches package. Is
Yeah,
the Blood Cell Corsair and the patches. You could also include, if you're going with the patches, South Sea Captains if you have them. Another option
yeah,
that could come in place of something like the Fallen Sun Cleric, even the Defender of Argus. That's something you could also cut to try and help with that early game options. And then finally, we have a budget aggro Pirate Warrior. So, Pirate Warrior traditionally been one of the best decks for newer players as well. And this is obviously a budget one. After the Fiery War Axe nerf, we've seen a lot of the Prince Keleseth Pirate Warriors being popular. And this is
even now
obviously
it's they've
this
mainly kind of they mainly disappeared now.
yeah, the Pirate Warrior has definitely taken a hit. This obviously is missing. The biggest thing this is missing is clearly patches. But if you do have
Yeah,
patches, obviously that can come right in. As Nzar's first
and
mate and patches on turn one is very powerful. But we're still talking about some strong cards here. This deck has a lot more reach as well, with your Mortal Strikes coming in, even though we haven't been seeing them that much recently. Even as cards like Galaka Crawler, which seems a bit counterintuitive, but it can be for the mirror and maybe eat up your Nzar's first mate sometimes if you want to get value. But yeah, we have Fiery War Axe as well making a return in this deck for a little bit more of that weapon-centric synergy with the Bloodsail Raider as well.
yeah, like like so South Sea Captain, obviously if you have it, uh, Captain Greenskin, Leroy, those are all potential cards. Even
Yeah,
Bitterside
Leroy.
Hydra once again.
Yeah,
Uh,
they
I
make a
mean,
good replacement for like the Naga Corsairs,
yeah.
especially if you're not
Even
going into.
I would even say Cobalt Scalebane and Bone Mares potentially. I mean, I think there was someone who
Bone
was
Mare's a
saying,
little bit reaching, I think. You'd probably
yeah, but
only ever play one in a Pirate Warrior deck, but
yeah. No, I remember seeing there was some Pirate Warrior lists where people were running Bone Mare though.
yeah, yeah.
Like
But
obviously to
that's
try and
people
get a
put
little bit
Bone
more
Mare
late
in
game.
everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. In the late game, very often it's the weapon synergy. Captain Greenskin, another one that comes up for something
Extra
like
value.
this, yeah, for extra value. Captain Greenskin obviously also synergizes with the pirates, and the other one that is an obvious inclusion is the South Sea Captain. Obviously, just giving that pirate buff to your pirates is pretty good. So yeah,
Yeah.
South Sea Captain, uh, patches, and Captain Greenskin sometimes. But I'd say Leroy is, let's say, more important than Captain Greenskin in most of the decks. So those could
Yeah.
definitely come in. You could definitely get a little bit more board centric cut cards like the Mortal Strikes, even the Acidic Swampus as well. If you've got a little bit more pirate centric package, if you're going a lot more pirates and you're not facing other pirate decks, you can also cut the Galaka Crawlers. I think you do just want
Yeah.
to have some kind of options on two, which can be a little bit of an issue with the Fiery War Axe being up to three these days. What are kind of can you think of any other two drops that you might bring in if you wanted to get rid of the
Heroic
Galakas?
Strike is I know
Or
it's not in the list.
or maybe even
Um,
just if you have the patches as well, you can play something like the Bloodsail Corsairs that we spoke about as well. Those could actually
yes,
come
yeah.
in. They're not two drops, but sometimes maybe you go Firefly on turn one into Bloodsail Corsair and the Flame Elemental on turn two, something like that. That could help smooth out your curve.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I said, Heroic Strike is extra bit of burst. Um, I'm trying to see. I don't think there's too many other two drops you really want. Like
Yeah.
that's why the nerf was such a big hit to to the deck, and that's why the deck dropped so much. Is making fireworks instead of two, making it three is such a upsets the curve so much.
Yeah. Okay, so those are all of our decks that we have here for the budget decks. Looking at this, kind of, do you think there's some uh, key cards that you could kind of craft to improve all these decks? Let's say some more like fun cards. So we're talking, epics, legendaries, or are there any? Like obviously we've mentioned Bone Mare and
Tar
Tar Creeper
Creeper,
and even Bitterside Hydra could improve a lot of these decks. So
Galactic
if you
Crawler, and
don't have
Vicious
those,
Fledgling
those are good
at
crafts.
rares. Epics. I mean, cards like Doomsayer help if you want to play a slow deck. Primordial Drake. Like we said, Corpse Taker with if you the variant packages in some decks works quite well. But I mean, yeah, I think
I
we've
mean,
we've
yeah,
covered a lot of the different budget options. I
yeah.
mean, and
Lich King is obviously
oh yeah, Lich King.
the
Uh,
kind of epic, the legendary that stands out a little bit now in terms of it can fit into most decks, give you some extra value. It's not always in the tier one decks. I'd say Tempo Rogue is probably the only deck that runs Lich King tier one. Oh, except the big decks, Big Priest and Big Druid. Uh,
yeah,
but other than those, it's pretty much just your tempo rogue lists that sometimes run it. Ken is also a relatively solid craft, and a lot of these mid-range decks you can kind of slot it into a lot of them.
and it has
Um,
the advantage of being classic. So,
and
cards like
yeah,
Ken and Leroy and Blood Mage Thanos have the advantage of being classic, so they never rotate.
yeah, and if they do get Hall of Fame, you will get your dust back. So that's quite
Yep.
nice. Ken is also great in any decks that have Bone Mare. That's largely why we've seen it come into Tempo Rogue, because it gives you a more solid chance of landing Bone Mare on turn 7 when your 6 mana card has a death rattle that basically summons resummons it in the sense that it summons another 4/5. So it's very difficult to deal with Ken on turn 6. So it is a very good target for something like Bone Mare. So that's another good reason to include Ken in a lot of your decks that we've mentioned that do have Bone Mare in.
Yeah, it's a very good curve.
Yeah. And then with a lot of them, I suppose you can also include the Death Knights if you have them. Sometimes maybe more for fun than value. Like let's say Uther and the Paladin, you're taking a little bit of a slower route, but if you want to try include Uther, it's possible. It probably will weaken your win rate a little bit. Probably want to take something like Howling Commander out of that deck, but it's something that you can include if you really want to because you have it. But you might be better off building a slightly more value-oriented mid-range paladin if you do have that. Um, yeah. Okay, I think we're gonna maybe look in a future episode more about crafting suggestions. But
Yep, I think we've
if you,
covered those a bit as well.
yeah, if you want us to kind of give a list of, let's say, our best the things we would suggest as the best crafts, depending on your maybe your play styles, maybe we can give a few different lists depending on how you like to play the game. Because obviously that's one of the great things about card games. You can kind of play them how you want to a certain extent. Uh, so yeah, if you want us to maybe give us go over that maybe in a future episode, just let us know. You can find us on Twitter. You can find Pandemonia at Pandemonia ZA. That's with a 3 for the E in Pandemonia and a 0 for the O in Pandemonia. So yeah. And you can find myself at dib_gaming. No numbers involved in that one. So yeah, if you want to give us any feedback, you can also leave comments on the YouTube video. So yeah, this has been quite a long episode, but we've covered quite a lot of decks. So hopefully you can find some decks that can help
Yep.
you climb on ladder. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining us, everyone. Cheerio for now.
Cheers.